how you doing? Welcome back. My name's Angela McCall and we are now on chapter 6 or tutorial 6 of the series for learning how to code in Lua using, or basically doing the walkthrough for the Solar2D own tutorials. So this is called implementing high scores. This is now where we're going to take a page in our game or a file in our game or a scene in our game. Scene is the correct term, but putting it into concepts you guys are familiar with, we will basically now code how to report the high scores. So we're going to dive on over to our left screen, and just before we get started, don't forget to hit that button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. So we are on the implementing high scores. So in here we are going to talk about Composer. Remember, Composer in the game management is a bit acting like God, where it controls all the director and the conductor, and it's controlling everything and knows everything that's going on in the game. We are going to then obviously calculate and deal with the high scores. We're going to load data, save data, we're going to display them, leave the scene, tidy up, and job done. So cracking on, let's start by seeing what they want us to do. So it's going to talk to us about the Composer and how it works. So meaning that the variables, functions and objects that you create are given in any given scene are isolated within that specific scene. So we've talked about that before. For example, the lives and the score variables are used within game.lua, and that's great, but we generally need to use these information in other scenes as well. So this is a generally good way of keeping an app clean and organized, but sometimes you need to access variables and objects from one scene to another. Okay, so what we are going to do, Lua provides a way to do this with the Composer. Okay, so we've got Composer set variable and Composer get variable. So what we're trying to do now is literally shout out to like the God Composer of our entire game. By the way, I need to use this variable. Can we set it so it's globally accessed within the game? And then when you're in the other scene, you can go, oi, can I have that variable back now? And that's basically what's going on here. Okay, so we are going to open our game.lua file and we're going to locate where it says end game. So where is our code? Okay, so we are going to go to our game. We are going to search for end game. There's 2 instances of the word end game. I'm going to jump down to here, and remember, after 0.8 seconds, once we have died and lost all our lives, we are going to be asked to transition back to the main menu, but we don't want to lose our scores. So we are going to add in here Composer. Before we obviously do this, it's got to go before, because obviously if we've transitioned, we've just called this command, we can't then save the score. So we are going to grab that piece of code there and we are going to set a variable. So we're now making a variable called final score available globally within our game, and the Composer is aware of it. So it's now under the control of the Composer or the director, and it's going to be called final score. And in it, we are going to put the variable score. Okay. Now, if you remember, that was calculated, copy and find, paste up there. We have got score going on. It's already populated. It's been keeping tabs on our screen, so it already exists. We don't need to do anything. We just need to take the information within it before it's deleted and lost forever and send it to the Composer to save for us to access in another scene. Okay, so now that we have set the variable, we need to go get the variable from inside another file. So we're going to save this. Our little dot says we haven't saved, and we can close it. And now we need to create a high scores scene. Now, if you remember, I actually created this a couple of chapters back. It is literally a copy of the scene template with nothing going on in it. We've never accessed it before now. So in here, we're going to initialize some variables. Now we've got a thing going on here that we haven't used before called JSON. Okay. Now in our programming world, we are coding in Lua. That's the language, but our device, whether it be a tablet or a mobile phone, or in the wider world, there could be other things that are going on. It works in its own languages, and we don't know that there's a universal language now for sort of talking to all devices, and that's called JSON. Okay, so when it needs to store data, we are going to use a JSON, because we could have actually coded this game in a different language other than Lua, but we still needed to be able to store data. So because the people that create the devices don't know what languages we're going to code in, the way that they allow us access to the device memory is that they use a universal language for managing things like this called JSON. Okay, so we're going to bring in the entire library that's already pre-existing so that we now have access to it in a JSON variable. We're also going to create a local variable called scores table, and remember it's a table because it's empty at the moment. We've got the curly bracket, so it is a variable, but a variable with a special kind of reason of being. Instead of us being able to store one object or one piece of information, we're going to be able to store multiple bits of information, because obviously multiple players will create multiple scores, and therefore we'll need to save multiple scores. And we're going to have something here called a file path. Now this here is using JSON as a way of creating a path through to the memory, the device's memory. Okay, so we're going to basically have a path for the file to live in. We're going to have to access the system library. We're going to create this file in memory called scores, so it's going to be made out of a JSON language. Okay, and we're going to store all of this information in a variable called file path, so we don't have to keep writing it time and time again. Again, all of these variables have been initialized outside of the scene functions so that we can access them whenever we want at any time and place. Now, loading the data itself, we're going to have to create this function called load scores. Okay, so I'm going to copy that, and it's just underneath where we've put that file path. So there's our file path, and again, remember it's outside of our scene events, so our director or our composer can access it. Okay, now dissecting this, what does it mean? Okay, so here is where you've got to pay attention a little bit, because what we're going to do is we're going to load that path that we've created in a readable state, and we're going to open a path. So it's like opening the door. Think of it as like a bridge. Okay, the bridge is now open for us to access. You're stood on one side, but we need to get the data which is at the other end of the bridge. Okay, so that's what the path is, that's the bridge, and now we need to access the file itself, where if we successfully access the file, then into its contents we are going to basically store the scores table, and we're going to have obviously coded it in the JSON and put it in there. Then if the scores table is nil, so say for example there is no data to store, or it holds the value of 0, then we are going to populate our table with 0, 0, 0. So if we very first load the game and the game has never been played before, obviously that score table is going to exist, but there's 10 players who've never existed, so they're just going to say 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay, so we could populate it as if a real world scenario. We've been playing this game for years and actually put numbers there, but we're not going to do that for now. Okay, now we've done that, we need the ability to save our score in the future once we have played the game as well. So underneath here we are going to create another function called save the scores table, okay, which we can call, and we've got a for loop. So remember, we're going to grab every number in our scores table up to the value of 11, because obviously we only want to save the detail of 10 players, and if we get to 11, so we're going to loop and loop and loop through our scores table, and once we hit the value of 11 we're going to stop. So using a for loop, we step back through the table from its count from 11 effectively, but there should only be 10. Removing each of the scores, that's fine. So we've got to grab the information out of the table and store it, that's fine. Next, we open the scores.json file like we did before. Unlike in the open, we now want to write that information, which is what the W for write stands for. This tells Solar2D that we need to write or overwrite whatever already exists in the file. It also tells Solar2D to open the file with write access, which is important because we need to save the data. That's fine. Once the file is open, we can then call write. So we need to then write to the file the data inside the scores table. We have to convert it obviously back to JSON code first of all, because the device itself works in JSON, and then we can close our connection, okay, which is what's going on just here. So we're going to create that for loop. So for every item in there, we are going to reduce it by 1 to grab the score and stick it in the table. So we're going to grab item at number 10, stick it in the scores table, go around, reduce by 1 down to 9 in the table, all the way down until there's nothing left. Then we are going to create an open path in writable mode to that file that we know exists. but obviously we've got to take the data inside our scores table. We are going to then encode it into our JSON language, write it to the file, and then when we're done we can close that bridge because we no longer need access to the device memory. Displaying the high scores, okay, that's when we can call that function we have just created earlier on. So we are in the create. So down here we're going to go in here, and now that we have done all our admin, we can load the scores. So this is again like the director in the changing rooms. This is more like the prop guys now building the props. We're loading the scores to the screen, and then underneath that we are going to grab this code and we're going to walk through it. Okay, so we're going to insert the saved score from the last game into the table, then reset it. So into our table, scores table, we are going to insert the answer from the get variable. So remember, before we exited our last gameplay, we've literally shouted to the composer or God and said, save or set our game variable called final score. And now we know that the composer's been holding like this envelope, as it were, with the score inside. And now we're going to get that off of him, okay? And we are going to reset it back to 0 so that we can save it in the future. So all is good there, okay? Now at this point, we don't know what our score ranks are going to be amongst the high scores. It might not be that we beat the highest player, okay? We could have had a low score. So now we need to sort that table. Obviously at the moment we had lots of zeros, but if we've just been playing the game as well, say it's like, you know, a couple of hours into playing the game, we've got all of these different scores going on. We don't know if our score was worthy of being high enough to be on that top 10 players, okay? So what we need to do is sort those top 10 results, or all results, into the highest to lowest, grab the top 10, save those, and see if our result is worthy of being stored and replacing anything else. So that's what we're going to do now. So now we're having to do like a sorting and comparison. So I'm going to grab that code, then we'll walk our way through it. So we are underneath the final score. Okay, so let's insert the entire series. So we're going to create a local function. So this can only exist inside here. All right, nobody else can use this function called compare. We're going to have two variables. We're going to have a variable A and variable B, and we're going to return the result, okay? And we're going to sort this. So we're going to get the scores table and we're going to send it to compare, and we're going to table sort. This explains it a little bit better. It says the compare function takes two values in, okay, and since we're sorting the numbers of the tables, we're going to compare A and B as numerical values. Function compares these two values as a number is A greater, so that's what that symbol there means. So where have we gone? This greater than the value B. If it's true, yay, then we know that they need to sort the values and essentially sort them out, okay? So in order to do that, we then need to save once we are happy with this. So we're going to save scores, and then following its creation, we need to update things. So we're going to put our background, because we've never used this file before, so there's no background existing at the moment, and we are going to create a high scores text. So we're in the create still, so we know what's going on here because we've done this lots of times before. So we're going to grab our background and put it on the screen, and then we're going to create a local variable. Again, it only exists inside this section of our game, called high scores header. We're going to call it a title. It's going to live in our scene group, which is fine. And it's just our text and our positioning on the screen. We've covered this lots of times before. Now, next let's display the scores using a simple for loop 1 to 10. For each score, we'll first set the intended Y position by calculating the Y position variable. So obviously we've got to put it on screen, but we don't want all 10 results to be on top of one another. So as we put the result on, we need to put the next one on the line below it, the line below it, the line below it 10 times. So that's what this is going to be doing here. So we are now underneath our high score. So there it is. And we are going to paste. Okay, so we've got a counter, I, starting at 1, and we're going to stop at 10. So whilst we are counting up to 10, we're going to do this loop. So if the scores table value is I, then position it 150 from the top of the screen, and then add to I 56. times that by 56 so that we've got the next position down. And so our Y position is always going to be 150 times the position of I, and it's going to move down and create our appearance of lines. Okay, so then what we need to do, put the actual rank of our numbers. And let's go inside the if statement still. So we are still inside the if statement, so that line here with the end and if shows us our location. Okay, so remember, we aren't going to need to use this in anywhere else, so that's why we've got a local, and it's actually only going to be living inside this if statement, so it's even further down in the nesting hierarchy. So we're going to create a variable to rank the number. Obviously it's a text, we're going to put it in the main group, etc, etc, but we're going to display, and we're going to basically, that's just the text on the screen. We're going to give that text a color, and we're going to put it as anchor position 1, okay, anchor X. All right, so basically we're going to lock in that first numbers result. Okay, then we're going to have this score. Again, it's a text line, so we've done this hundreds of table, but this time we're going to feed to it the data that's in the first cell of our table, and that's what's going to actually populate. And obviously that anchor's position is 0, so that they're not the same, so that's fine. So if you look up here, we have got some text taking place. So we've got a concatenation here where we're going to, instead of putting the text, we are going to put the scene group, so that's fine. I equals open bracket or close bracket, so we're going to finish basically putting the score nicely on the screen. Okay, make sure I haven't missed anything, just a few seconds. My scores look fine. Okay, and then we're going to work through this here. So most of the above code should be straightforward because we've done it enough. We're introducing an important concept called anchors. So by default, Solar2D positions things in the center of any display object at the X and Y coordinates. So here's an image, okay, and our X and Y, okay, where they meet in the very center is where the anchor of a image lives. However, sometimes you'll need to align a series of objects on their edges. Okay, and that is where we are. So obviously we want to align on our left edge so that the numbers line up nice and neatly on their left side. So it's basically like left indenting or right indenting our text as if you was in Microsoft Word. So we don't want the text to all be centered. We need them all to line up on the left hand side edge, which is basically what we're doing, because we don't know how long that number is. We don't know if it's a single digit, as in you've scored 10, or if it's going to be, you know, in the thousands. So to make it look nice and neat and tidy, we want to left align our text. Naturally, oh, that's what this is doing. So naturally, Solar2D supports vertical anchor points. That's fine, that's explaining it. So now let's create a button to go back to the menu. So once we've seen the high scores, so we've gone to the page on our app with the high scores. Once we've seen it, we want to go back to the menu and play the game. So, okay, so down here, we are going to, before we end this, we are going to position this at scene number 94. So if you look between 93 and 94, we need to put in our menu button. So 93 and 94, I think we're on slightly different numbers, but essentially we need to put it there, and then we end. So that's our function for our scene. Okay, so there's our little mini function there. We've got our for loop. There it's ending, so I'm just going to tidy my code. Oh, I need to do that. Delete and delete, and then we'll leave a little space. So there we go. All right, so now our button exists, and it's basically saying menu, so we know to go back to the main menu, and we've got our event list there, and all is good there. Okay, now we're going to leave the scene, so obviously we've got to do something when we go back to the menu. So on line 50, so that's going to be up here somewhere. There we go. We've got, so when we call go to menu, down here, we've already known because it's been loaded first, to go back and do our crossfade back to our menu scene. So let's give that a bit of a whirl, I think. Then we've got to do some, in fact, let's just do that last line because it's nice and quick and easy, and we'll just tidy up, we'll remove the scene like we learned in the previous game. So in the hide did. Okay, hide did, hide did, and we're just going to tidy up the scene so we don't need it. Save. Okay, let's bring that back up on screen. So play. Oh, we've got to get some scores obviously to see. In fact, actually, let me reload. Let's go to high scores and see what happens. So there's our 10 scores. We've not yet played the game. Okay, let's go to the menu. Let's play the game. Obviously, we've got to create some scores now. So I'm gonna start shooting until I can kill myself. So I've 60 points. Come on, God, need an asteroid down there. There we go. I'm gonna kill myself. 2 lives left. Let's kill some more and then die again. Died. One more time. Start shooting and then I can die. Right, so I've got no lives. We're going to fade out back to the menu. Excellent. And our scores. And there is our scores. That is all super. That's exactly what we want. Now, let's see if we can play it again and see if we can now start to populate our game. So I'm going to obviously, this is the second time I'm playing it, so I could be a different player. So if you think of this as like an old-fashioned arcade game, you know, you want to be the top player all the time. So there we go, I've died once. So I'm not going to have done so well this time, so I should be positioned second if our sorting is working correctly. And I'm only going to score 900 this time. Oh no, I'm not, because I'm missing all of our, there you go, died. So I should now be positioned second on our high scores. And I am. So we've now got a hierarchy system whereby we can play our game. Let's actually now score over this, and now everything should get pushed down. So let's just do this one more time. Okay, let's start shooting. There we go, lots to shoot over here and over here. Let's kill ourselves. Oh, there you go. Have I just, pants, there we go, I did die. But I just dropped myself off the end of the screen then, so that's something that they haven't yet handled. But we're going to die, and then on our third game we need to get over 1700. So let's start shooting, and we're at 1500. Start shooting. So there we are, we're in the 2000s now, so we're all good, and I can die. So now we should be positioned first, and the other 2 scores should have been positioned further down the line, and our little hierarchy is working. Everything is working fine and dandy. So that brings us into the end of this particular game now. I'm just wondering actually if we can actually test. So if I do restore and go back to high scores, and there we go, now we've reset the game. In fact, I could just close the project, open the project, let me go over here, and reopen the project. So remember, it's in device memory, and there's our scores. Okay, so we now have a permanent line in device memory. And just to give you a little insight as to where that is actually being stored now in your Corona files, what we can do is look, there's a way to actually see that file called scores.json. And if we go up to file and then we go into our project sandbox, okay, this is our Corona, it's like where the Corona files or Solar2D's files actually live. But we actually have a documents folder now. Okay, so remember, we wouldn't control this. This would be the device doing so. But there's our scores.json. And this is what it looks like when you open it up. So we've got one line inside square brackets, and it literally is a table, a number, basically saying one cell of information, separated by a comma to the second cell of information, third and fourth and fifth. And that is basically our file now living in our device memory. So that kind of brings us to the end of this particular chapter. In our next chapter, I think we're going to start dealing with some sound and music so that we can bring some life and some funky sound. So when we hit that laser, it can go make a noise, and that kind of brings us to the end of this lesson. So once again, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next chapter.